after that, found his true passion for helping others to succeed and grow their businesses from a lot of the things he learned. And so, without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Russell.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. Let me get this set up here real quick so we can get rolling. Let's see. That should do that. And then everybody should see big psychedelic colors. And then we'll change that here in 1 second. And can we confirm do we see the presentation? All right,
yes, cool. We can see.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you. Awesome. Well, all set. Thank you so much for everyone for taking the time to come out today. I sincerely appreciate y'all for being here. And I am very excited to talk about something that has become my life's passion. And part of that passion is how to build amazing cultures within a business. And as you can see here, the picture of this nice scenic view in front of you, it's quite beautiful, isn't it? Well, as we go through this presentation, you'll find out it's more than just a pretty picture. But a quick insight that I had is I used to think that I was a beach guy, and that was until the first time that I went snow skiing several years ago, and I had instantly became hooked. And not only was I enthralled by this majestic, beautiful landscape, but I was just quite quickly to learn how powerful of a force a mountain actually is. We'll have more to come on that, but as Dan mentioned, I'm Russel Dubree. I'm a business coach and growth advisor. I help companies build high performance cultures in their organization. And today I'm going to share with you the 8 keys to a high performance culture. PowerPoint will work for me here. There we go. Okay. So 68 million people, or 68 million, I should say, people quit their jobs in 2021. And still kind of waiting to get all the facts and figures from 2022. I imagine that will tell a different picture. But even if we go back to the start of the pandemic for a couple of years there, this was roughly the rolling number of people that were leaving their jobs in any 12-month period for the last couple of years. And like I said, I know things are shifting a little bit more recently, but right when we're still trying to decipher on this entire job market where everyone went, and right, we know we've gone from the terminology of the Great Resignation to the Great Reshuffle, and then there recently became not too long ago, and probably still sticks to this day, another great R word you may or may not have heard of. The Great Regret, right? That's the newer one that came about. But if we really think about this, the pandemic didn't change who we are as human beings. It changed our tolerances for particular environments and situations. And that's really what makes the conversation of culture all the more important today. But before we get all into the good stuff about culture, let's talk more about mountains. And you'll see here in a picture before you, this is a picture of my son and I, and we had just completed our first big ski run together. And you can see that in the background there. And for reference, I'm the one on the left as you're looking at the picture today. But if we were actually to take this again, our height differences would be flip-flopped. He towers over me these days. But you can't see it because our faces are covered, but we were really excited, not just because of the challenge of the ski run itself, but getting past this hurdle now allowed us to explore so many other parts of the mountain that we had only wished we'd been on, could go on before. And so our skiing adventures were about to get a lot more exciting with all the new opportunities available to us. Something you probably didn't think about that you might be getting today is a quick little geology lesson. So let's talk real quick about how these massive, powerful, immovable objects are formed. There are multiple processes, but they pretty much all involve a number of forces working underneath the ground, pushing against each other, creating this tension so that the only place for the ground to go is up. And over the course of a very long time, this continues to happen until we get to see what we get to enjoy today as a fully grown mountain. So if these elements didn't come together, or one simply pushed right past the other, all we'd see is a flat surface or maybe a small hill at best. And I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Missouri originally, and I love a good prairie landscape, and I think it's beautiful. But let's face it, no one uses the concept of flat land when they're talking about building something great. So just, in fact, what does a mountain have to do with culture? You may be asking yourself. And let me share that with you. But I'd like to share that through a lens of my own business story, as Dan briefly mentioned at the beginning. And what better way to tell the story of a business than a chart depicting the revenue of that business, which you can see in the green line there. And so I founded this business about 16 years ago or 17 years ago, almost now. We were a digital technology company, building lots of websites and all things online. And as you can see in that line here, that the flat part there, we went from after the first 5 years of being stagnant and honestly quite near bust to becoming one of the most sought after companies in the Dallas area for our particular line of service. Eventually in 2017, we sold that company for a pretty good valuation, an 8-figure exit. And we continued to stay in business and grow it after that. But we built a mountain. And so you might be asking yourself, what actually happened there? How did we get that highly sought after hockey stick growth? Well, I can tell you that in 2011, or right around that time, after near exhaustion of struggling to keep the business afloat, we had encountered an epiphany. And that epiphany is we become too focused on numbers like revenue, expenses, profit, all your stereotypical metrics when talking about a business success or evaluating a business. And we just operated the business under the notion that if we paid well, did okay work, weren't mean, and tried to sprinkle some fun in between, our clients and our people should be happy and we should make money, right? Easy peasy. Well, I can tell you, in fact, it's the opposite. We were wrong in a major way. But the mountain that we built wasn't made of revenue, expenses, sales, profit, all that stuff. Those were simply the byproduct. The mountain we had built was made of culture. And culture is the foundation of a successful business. If you want to build a mountain of a business, you first need to build a mountain of a culture. And that mindset shift for us that changed the game was deciding this one simple thing is not only do we want to hire the best talent, that makes sense, right? But more importantly, we needed to create an environment where those people can thrive and ultimately do their best work. And it's that focus that is what allowed us to turn the business around and achieve that success we did that you saw on the graph before. So as we get into this topic of culture, there is an exception. And I imagine many of you are already sitting there saying, I know tons of successful businesses, Russell, that are otherwise known with horrible cultures. And you're not wrong. And that exception is that if your product or service is in high demand or otherwise entrenched in people's lives, that exception can continue to persist because people simply tolerate all the issues of that bad culture. And that's true whether you're an employee or a customer of that business. Right? They can continue to throw money at the problem, and they really just consider it a cost of doing business as it relates to turnover, whether that's customers or employees. And so real quickly, we've probably got too many on here that we can do this out, but throw it in the comments there. What businesses come to mind when you hear that? Otherwise, businesses with horrible culture that are known for, that kind of have us in their tractor beam, so to speak, that we just tolerate. And I can already probably imagine what some of the common ones are. First one I usually always hear is Amazon. I'm sure that's in there. Facebook, right? Facebook is getting a less than stellar name. I'm sure there's some great ones, some I haven't even thought of.
Apple, Walmart, Starbucks, airlines in general, IBM, cell phone companies. CVS. Yeah. Let's not do this.
Yeah, no shortage for sure by any means. And then there's always exceptions to the rules and whatnot. But right, we don't have a shortage. So yeah, thank you for those examples. Thank you for throwing those in there. And let's talk about good culture for a quick second. And in a second here, I'm going to pop up a phrase that's known to a particular business. And then that business is known for having a generally good culture. And when this phrase pops up, is my belief that every person will know what phrase this business is referring to. So, all right, we're all ready here. I'm good. We're after lunch, so no, this isn't going to make anybody hungry, but my pleasure. What business are we talking about? Good old Chick-fil-A, right? And, I don't know about you folks, but it blows my mind every time I drive by a Chick-fil-A, almost any time of day, it seems like, and you see a near endless line of cars in the drive-thru, right? Sometimes they're blocking the road. And I take notice of that line of cars, and I, for whatever reason, always look at the places next to it, usually typically other fast food restaurants. And you probably see easily 3, 5, 6 times or more cars in those other, or in Chick-fil-A than those other places all day long. And my kids might make this argument, but I don't know if there's anyone here that want to argue that Chick-fil-A's food is 5, 6, 7 times better than its competitors. And if you probably are one of the few excited Chick-fil-A fans out there that believe that, well, then I just ask, well, surely then you'd be willing to pay 5, 6, or 7 times the price. So that just gets the conversation down and say, well, maybe it's just 1.5 or 2 times better. And what that just tells us, it's not the food, or it's not just the food that makes Chick-fil-A better, but the fact that they create an amazing experience. And that's why they have 5 times the customers. And this was exemplified to me as well. My son, whom I showed earlier recently, was trying to get his first part-time job. And every place he applied to, right, applied to all the normal places that a teenager would want to do. And they all contacted him and called him back within a few hours. And in fact, the job that he ended up taking, called him back in an hour and said, be here in 30 minutes and bring your social security card, right? Quite the difficult hiring process. But that's not the one place that he wanted to work. He wanted to work at Chick-fil-A, but one, they weren't even hiring at the moment. And this was back about a year or so ago when, right, you saw signs everywhere of all these different places trying to hire. But yeah, he wanted to work at Chick-fil-A, but not only were they not hiring, even the process to go through to get hired, he had to submit a video of him talking about a few different things and this whole several step process just to work at Chick-fil-A. So what this nets out to is it tells us that there just might happen to be a relationship between team experience and customer experience. So I think this got mentioned earlier, but there's another company back in up until the late 90s that used to be known for having a great culture as well. And in fact, this particular company was known for being so customer centric that I worked at a comedy club when I was in college. And one night there was a show where a comedian was doing a skit making fun of actually how good a customer service this particular company had. So I'm not one to try to recreate comedy skits, but as he was doing this skit, the entire audience was laughing hysterically. And right, why do we most often laugh at comedy? Because it's a little bit true. We've kind of experienced the same thing in one fashion or another. So any quick guesses what company we might be talking about? You can feel free to throw them in the chat there. That up until the late 90s was known for having an exceptionally good culture. All right. Well, you might be thinking about it in your heads. I'll pop it up on the screen. Probably lots of examples it could be, but Walmart. And again, like all things considered, I've had good and bad experiences in Walmart, but I don't think the predominant thought when we talk about Walmart today is necessarily superior customer service or great culture, right? And I know about Walmart's where some of you folks live, but I think honestly, sometimes the last person I might ask for help would be a Walmart worker. They seem to have other things on their mind. So I might ask the person next to me for help or how to locate something. But in one sense too, you have to give it credit. Walmart has managed to stay relevant and compete on price. But I think that relevancy has come at the cost of customer service and their workers. So how long will they continue to last? Time will certainly tell. Maybe they'll get back to Sam Walton's, the customer is always right. So we have one other big problem that has a big effect on culture, and that's its very definition. How do you define culture? What does it mean? And again, feel free to throw some of your answers or your thoughts here in the chat, or you kind of start to think about how do you define culture? What is your own definition of culture? And what I'm probably going to guess here is whatever you're thinking in your head or whatever ends up in chat, those are really good answers. And I don't think not a single one of them are going to be wrong or you can even argue with. But yet there's one little thing is that there always seems to be a missing element or two when we see or read or hear what somebody's definition of culture is. And in fact, if you were to go search on Google, you would get the same results, tons and tons of definitions, all interesting, compelling in their own right, but all also leaving a little something to be desired. And this is a problem for one simple reason. is what happens when we as humans don't understand something, when the definition is maybe a little squishy or intangible. Right. What we typically do there is we're far more likely to push it aside, or in some ways outright ignore it. And this is what happens in a lot of today's businesses, and for today's business leaders. They prefer to focus on things they do know and understand. Going back to my own story, expenses, taxes, profit, cash flow, income, all those things, that it feels so much better to go out and move the needle on those items. It feels like you're moving the business forward. Instant gratification in some cases. And right, you can go make a deal, get a new customer, you can cut an expense. You can invest money, purchase new equipment, all these things that have real, immediate, tangible value. And so then we start to hear statements like, yeah, I know culture is important, but what do the sales numbers look like? Let's talk about those. Or we're going to focus on culture once we get profitable. And here's honestly what the one I hear quite often the most is, we have a great culture. We have happy hours and get-togethers once a month. Everybody loves working here. So the question just really becomes, how do we define culture in a way that everyone can understand? How can we create a shared understanding behind the definition of culture? Well, this is the definition that I like and prefer best, and it gets it very hard to the simple, most simplistic manner of it, and something we could all really understand, that culture, stated or unstated, is the cumulative acceptable and unacceptable behaviors within a particular group. Is it acceptable or unacceptable to miss deadlines? Is it acceptable or unacceptable to have a disorganized work area? Is it acceptable to present new ideas to your boss, your manager, your team, the CEO for that matter? And then how acceptable or unacceptable is it to create or treat customers rudely? The list goes on. I mean, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of behaviors across an entire organization. Especially the bigger an organization exists, or the bigger an organization is. And it's all of these collective behaviors of the business that either enhance or diminish the quality of the culture for that business or organization. And so just like if we took a look at Chick-fil-A, what this also leads us to is that there is no miracle business strategy, no silver bullets in this game to produce good results. There is only great execution. And if you were to take a look at Chick-fil-A's business model, we'd see that there's really nothing profound to it. Other than that they show up every day and they serve their customers and their team in the best way possible. And right, if again, I don't have any Chick-fil-A fans we have there, think of all the ways they do that. They hand out coupons just randomly all the time when they say you've waited and it's only been 2 minutes, or look at all the things they built to make their team comfortable when they might have to stand outside. They've got heaters, they've got all kinds of things, again, to just speed up the process, be more efficient, and make everybody comfortable in that whole process. And so there's nothing inherently innovative about anything that you notice there. The only thing I honestly find innovative is that I don't see a single other fast food chain trying to do something similar. So if you're now on board that we need a great culture to support great execution, then the question is, how do we know a great culture when we see one? And I'm sure many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but if you haven't, it's a basic psychological theory that outlines the fundamental needs we have as human beings. And happens to myself all the time. We might often tend to confuse and complicate what is a want and a need. But the reality is that most all of our actions, or pretty much all of our actions, are driven by these fundamental needs. So what I'm going to walk you through is a quick take on Maslow's hierarchy, but through the lens of being a team member at a company. And so at the bottom, we have survival, the most basic of needs, right? Just simply surviving. And this just says that a team member needs a paycheck and certain benefits to make this a viable relationship. And just like as it being at the bottom, if this is the only need that's being met, then this person is going to likely leave the company at a moment's notice for something that might be only slightly better compensation. And then next we have is security. Security is just one step better in that a team member will feel more comfortable if they believe that their position or subsequently their paycheck is stable and that there's no threats to it, right? Threats often come in the form of a bad manager, company stability, or hostile coworkers, anything we might think of when we talk about a toxic work environment. And then we have belonging. Right. This is where we start to get positive oriented. And this really just comes down to is, does the team member feel like they're a part of something, whether that's their team or the company itself? And this is really where we start to break through from the indifferent to the engaged, and people can actually start doing good work. Next we have is importance. And this just really means, is the work they're doing rewarding and meaningful? Are they contributing to the company's success? Are they feeling successful in their own right? And are they subsequently being recognized for their contributions to this entity that they belong to? And then last is self-actualization. And this is just really about alignment of passions and purpose, and how well are those being filled within the company? And are those aligned with the mission of the company? And so we might ask ourselves is, why is it so important to check all these different parts of this pyramid of these needs? Well, I'm sure we've all heard it and said it before. It's that ever critical word of engagement. And just why is engagement so important? And it's because, right, it's the generally held belief that the more engaged someone has, or the more engaged a team member is, the better they're going to perform in their respective roles. Problem solved, right? Thank you so much for coming out today. Appreciate everyone's time. Not quite. It's great to understand these needs, but they don't quite tell us all the details we need to make it tangible, to make culture actionable, right? We want this to be tangible. We want to feel like the value where we go focus on culture, that we're going to get something out of it. And so what's the level deeper that we need to go to specifically build our team up through this level of pyramid and create max engagement? And just real quickly, by the way, what does a pyramid here also look like? Remember those mountains? And so that's what gets us to the 8 keys to high performance culture. These 8 simple but essential principles bedded into the behaviors of the business is what is actually going to lead to an overall successful business. And so before we dive into each one of these, feel free to take notes, or even just a mental note as we go through, and rate how your company, your organization is performing on a scale of 1 to 10 on these, and maybe just make a little note as to why you think the way you do. And right, if you don't want to rate your organization, maybe rate your immediate team. And if you don't want to rate your team, just rate yourself in terms of how well you feel like you embody these principles. But we're just kind of a little bit of tracking along the way as we talk about these. And I could easily spend probably an hour or more, or probably a lot longer actually, on each one of these, going in depth in general. And I don't think any of us have time for that today. But later on in the presentation as well, I'll provide a link where you can go to, where I've accumulated some other great top people that have written about and created a lot of great content about each one of these individually. And if you're interested in learning more, you can certainly go check out some of those awesome resources. So without further ado, let's dive into each one. So first on the list is belief. And there's a reason why this is number 1, but you must wholeheartedly believe in these principles, because they are going to get put to the test every single day. And that is why this is first, is because without belief, you won't be able to accomplish the rest. Belief is what's going to guide you to make the right decisions, despite what conventional wisdom, standard practice, and emotions might dictate otherwise. And this is most especially true when difficult situations arise. But I think Muhammad Ali says it's best. It's the repetition of affirmations that leads to belief. But once belief becomes a deep conviction, that's when things begin to happen. It starts with belief. Next is purpose. And a business must exist for the reason beyond the simple pursuit of making money. And this is becoming talked about a lot more in today's business world. But one of the misnomers I think that exists out there is that a purpose doesn't have to be world saving. It just has to be something that we can clearly identify, and that it's something that people can choose to rally behind. It can be how to create the longest lasting piece of chewing gum, or whatever makes sense with the business you're in. And many of you might have heard of Simon Sinek, one of the probably I'd say world's biggest proponents of purpose, puts it very nicely, but he says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And again, that is true whether you're a customer or a team member for that business. And just to exemplify this in practice, there's a quick parable from his book. He talks about the story of two stonemasons. And in the story, a person walks up to the first stonemason and asks them if they enjoy their work. The stonemason replies how hard it is and backbreaking the work is. The days are super long. It's a grind. But you know what? It's a job and pays the bills. A few feet away, goes up to another stonemason and asks the same question. Do they enjoy their work? And they immediately look him in the eye and reply, I love my job. Sure, the work is hard and it's backbreaking, but I'm getting to build a cathedral for the Almighty, a sense of purpose. And so we can look at that quick example and ask ourselves is, which one enjoys their job more? Which one do you think gets more of their work done? And which one is likely to keep doing their job longer than the other? So we just ask ourselves, is do we or the organization have a compelling purpose that gets us out of bed in the morning? Does it get other people out of bed in the morning? Do you individually have a sense of purpose that gets you out of bed each day? Integrity. Number 3, also known as trust. But in an organization, people need to be able to trust in the organization and its leaders, and that they can believe what they see and hear. And this is critical to creating an environment where people feel safe so they can focus on doing their best work. And if you really think about what this comes down to, it's nothing more than saying what you do and doing what you say on a consistent basis. And you might be able to tell from the books behind me and as well that I'm quite the avid reader, but there's another great book out there on the topic called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And in this, he talks about that an organization or an individual is going to pay a trust tax or get paid a trust dividend. And trust taxes are paid in the form of complex processes, gatekeepers, red tape, all the negatives we think about when we talk about a bureaucracy or a business or environment like a trust. And most often when trust taxes are getting paid in that environment, that people tend to look out for number one or themselves most often, and not the collective needs of the business, their team, the group, others, et cetera. But an environment of trust dividends, all of that unnecessary minutia is eliminated. An environment comprised of trust dividends, people can move faster, act autonomously, and are incentivized to do their best work. Hence the title, Speed of Trust. So what sort of trustworthy or untrustworthy behaviors do you find in your current environment? And how consistently do you find yourself in the company following through on its promises? Next we have is transparency. And transparency is very closely linked with integrity. Transparency reinforces integrity. The more you share and show in the organization, the more team members can understand why certain decisions are being made. And the better they understand, the more they can contribute to the opportunities and issues facing the business. Transparency is what provides empowerment to solve problems and create value. There is a big threat to transparency, and that is often in the form of bad news. And we've seen it over and over again when leaders try to diminish and shove bad news under the rug. And this happens when we talk about the scandals like Enron, Lehman Brothers, British Petroleum, Deepwater Horizon oil spill. What was the largest oil spill in our history? But how many people lost their life savings, their relationships, their livelihoods simply because of a lack of transparency? And I really believe that all people are good-natured, and that if you go back and break down these particular instances, they weren't calculated malicious acts. People are simply following through on their instinct to make bad news not seem so bad, compounded again and again and again. Transparency is what's necessary for team members to solve solve the business's problems to the fullest extent, but that's only if they know those problems to the fullest extent. Next we have is mentorship. Mentorship is the practice of enhancing the professional and personal skills of the team members in the company. Ideally, this is often done with a culture of those that know how, teaching those that don't, i.e. mentors. And I had the pleasure of working what I think is probably the world's greatest organization when it comes to training, and that's the U.S. military during my time in the Air Force. And for any of you might be veterans or related to veterans out there, you know that training is everything in the military. From the start of your career until you are finished, you are constantly required to attend various forms of training, from the most seemingly insignificant types of things to big things, weeks long, months long training. But this is why the Air Force can let 18-year-olds work on billion-dollar equipment. And I don't know how many people you have teenagers in the room, but I can quite honestly say I'm afraid to let my teenager cook in the kitchen alone for 5 minutes without fear of burning the house down, let alone work on any billion-dollar equipment I might have laying around. But the Air Force can do this because they have invested so many resources into their training programs, and that ultimately it's an absolute requirement that they complete every step of that training before they're ever allowed to do the real thing, which might not always be the case in the business world, but you can take the essence there and what's important. But how much investment is your company putting into training, or your organization? How much are you putting into training? And are people in the organization acquiring new skills and competencies because of those efforts, or just simply of their own ambition? Next, number 6, ownership. And if a company is going to have high integrity by fulfilling its promises to its customers, then it absolutely has to have a high level of ownership to do so. This is especially when things don't go as planned, because we all know that everyone is happy to claim credit for success, but how willing is the company and or individuals willing to take accountability for when things go wrong? And right, we know in the world, right, customers and team members are far more forgiving when someone takes ownership of their situation. And that's actually the best opportunity for a good review, is when an issue is solved in an exceptional manner. And real quickly, in my time at my former company, this got brought home in a big way to me, and that we saved $1 million account by taking ownership when we messed up their project. As I mentioned, we did websites and online technology, and we had a little oopsie that took a pretty high traffic e-commerce site down for a little bit, right? Definitely had an effect on their sales numbers and business, and got it all fixed up and patched up or whatever. But then we ended up setting up a meeting with them and tried to discuss kind of what happened and what went down. And when we walked into that meeting, you could tell just by looking at their eyes that they fully expected us to make excuses and diminish the significance of that issue that we caused. But instead, we did quite the opposite. We apologized profusely, obviously, but even more so, we admitted our fault, and we shared with them all the action items that we were putting in place to make sure this would never happen again. And also so we could eradicate other issues that might happen as well. And so not only did we save this particular project and client, but we opened up a whole new level of relationship and projects with that customer. So the easy question to ask here is, your culture one of ownership or one of blame? Fun. And quite honestly, this is the word that comes to mind the most when I think people talk about culture. Happy hours, team building events, all that good stuff. I think that's really important. Those are definitely a big component. But I think the real challenge when we talk about fun and culture is, how do we make day-to-day work fun and enjoyable rather than having those two concepts be mutually exclusive? And a quick example there is, I learned this at a very young age, trying to coach my daughter's soccer team. And, which instruction do you think they're more likely to get inspired by? Hey, girls, we're going to go over here and we're going to practice our dribbling skills for the next 20 minutes. Or let's play a game of red light, green light with our soccer ball. And while we do this, we're going to work on a couple of things. I think we know the answer to that. And then a lot of people might just say, well, Russell, that's soccer. That's fun. This is business. This is serious. But it's really the same. Adults aren't any different. We just maybe sometimes forget we're different. And people love to play games, adults and kids alike. And a big part of gameplay is winning. So how do we add some of that gamification to the work environment? One that's well-constructed, game-like aspect to the day-to-day work can make it seem like a breeze and not perceived as boring and monotonous. So the question just to ask is, how much are fun and work currently linked within your organization? Number 8, measurement. Last but certainly not least. And since we know a part of fun is winning, then people have to be able to measure so they can know whether they've won the day or not. And we see this often in the form of goals and KPIs. And I've seen a lot of businesses, I don't know about you, create some amazing goals and KPIs that what happens next? They get tucked in a corner or put in a desk and don't see the light of day until the next time comes around when someone asks them about them. But if we just think about it, success is the ability to match effort and reward. And the more clearly any team member can directly correlate their effort to a particular metric, the more they're going to be motivated to achieve that metric or better. And this is quite honestly why we love sports so much, because at any given time, we can look at the scoreboard and know exactly who is winning and who is losing. No ambiguity, right? In fact, if you take a sport like basketball, we can look at all the other stats that aren't actually the score: rebounds, turnovers, steals, shot percentage, and we can get a good idea as the actual score of the game. The highest performing companies are the best at identifying these indicators down to an individual level that move the needle of progress, move the needle of value for the business. So what kind of indicators and metrics are you using to measure performance? And are those indicators actually helping to increase performance, or are they distraction from more meaningful indicators? So we go back to this picture and what happened here. What happened was the continuous implementation and iteration of these 8 principles. I didn't know this at the moment, right? This is some of bringing together in this kind of package format is hindsight, but I just knew that we wanted to create a positive, productive work environment that people wanted to be at and that they could do their best work. And it was the continuous iteration and implementation of these principles that allowed us to achieve the success we did. So not only are these important individually, but it's their collective power that actually has the biggest impact. And why is that? Oops. Sorry about that. Right, something you might not expect. We had a geology lesson. Now we're going to do a quick astronomy lesson. But the most perfect shape in our universe is a circle or a sphere. And in fact, our entire universe is made up of nothing of circles of circles of circles. These perfect creations are formed by all of those circles and their various gravitational forces pushing against each other to keep these in line. Stars against planets, planets within galaxies, and an endless amount of galaxies pushing against each other. Just like how our mountain was formed, this tension creating these shapes. And in fact, this is so important that if you only change the Earth's orbit slightly, if our circle, so to speak, was broken, that it would mean catastrophic changes for our environment and life as we know it. And a sphere is perfect because those forces come together and create this shape. And when everything is in unison, everything works as it should. And so just like our ozone layer does for Earth, that's what these 8 keys do, is they form a protective shield around the business. The stronger these principles are embedded into the business, the more the business can withstand. And this also starts to show how we can't just be strong in 1 or 2 areas, but rather all of them. And if we start to remove 2 or 3, we see how our protection layer becomes weaker. Our orbit shifts, problems begin to snowball. A business can't just have a great vision and purpose and be full of integrity, but lack ownership and mentorship. Nobody will know how to get anything done. And you might have a strong culture of ownership, or it's hard to have a culture of ownership when you're not being transparent and sharing information. And I don't know what this business looks like, but I can only imagine if the only thing that we're doing in the business is having fun, we might have some problems in some other areas. So you can start to get your own ideas of how these examples play off each other, how too much of one or not enough of the other can create this imbalance within the business. And I'll show you one more quick circle in action. And this fortuitous cycle highlights how the flow of focus should occur in a business. If the leadership of the organization just adjusts their entire focus on nurturing, supporting, building the team is what's going to turn around and take care and provide value to the customers. The customers will then in turn take care of the business, right, by providing money in exchange for goods and services. And if they're served well, they're going to give reviews and recommendations. And then the business is going to turn around and take care of the leadership and all the other stakeholders and everyone in the business by raising the value of the company, providing dividends, bonuses, incentive performance, all that stuff. And round we go. Everybody wins. But just like our orbit, when this cycle gets broken, the balance falls apart. And we see this when we as leaders talk too much about revenue, profits, that business stuff, rather than the team. Or maybe a decision gets made in the boardroom that directly impacts a customer by bypasses the team, right? The one best suited to serve that customer and knows their needs the best. And so, right, we see this, and what does that tell us? Is that job number one of a leader is to instill, nurture, and protect the culture of a business. If we want our perfect orbit structure in a business, this is what we have to do. And right, I get it as a smaller business or just starting out, you've got to wear many hats as a leader, but it's not too far into the business. Once we have built a team, that this becomes more and more important. And once you get to a certain size, again, this is the only thing that's important. Supporting those teams and empowering them to meet the needs of the customer to provide the most value possible. And furthermore, we talk about these concepts, these principles don't just apply to the team, but what if you apply them to all the stakeholders in the business? What it would look like if companies were transparent and helped their suppliers and vendors measure their success, and rather than just trying to get everything as cheap, fast, and whatever with quality? What if companies were actually honest with customers, not only about the pros of their product, but also the cons? And especially when things went wrong. Hey, we messed up. We know it. We're going to fix it. We're going to make this right. And how would the local community feel if the business understood and believed in that business's purpose, that it could bring some fun into the community and provide more value than just being a job supplier? And what about shareholders? Wouldn't it be so much easier to pick a stock if you knew exactly how a company was measuring its success and how it stayed accountable to those goals? And not only would it be great to believe a company that or own a company that you believed in from a financial perspective, but also that was a great part of the community. When all stakeholders succeed, a business becomes an unstoppable force for good. This is the new wave of capitalism. Businesses that are better for everyone, not just a select few. This isn't about handouts. This isn't about free rides. Everyone has to do their part, but everyone also benefits too. Real quick, there's a couple other important elements that I think are critical to culture that aren't one of the 8 keys, and the first one just being compensation, and that this whole system is predicated on the notion that people get paid a fair and competitive wage and benefits. And what this just comes down to is it is very hard for a team to be fully engaged when the gap between the work they enjoy doing and the pay they are making becomes too wide. So you can have the best environment, but if that becomes too wide, you're going to have problems. And we used to tell our team, right, this is where you can get some tangible value out of this, that they could all go make 10% more tomorrow if that's what mattered most to them. That was especially in the tech space, that was easily available to them. But what we found over time is that definitely between 10 to up to 20% of what someone could go make somewhere else, culture would supply that value in turn. Now, we got in a little bit of craziness during the pandemic when people could go make 50, 60, 70, 80%. That's where we landed on the great regret. But people knew in the end what they were trading off for that. And then next we have is diversity, equity, inclusion. And where does that fit into the picture? But DEI becomes a byproduct of a culture focused on these principles. If you're focused on growing the best team, a team you're honest with, a team you hold accountable to delivering value to all stakeholders, then there becomes less room for things like biases, like sexism, racism, and all the other detriments to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture. And in fact, those issues do arise. They get dealt with swiftly and with the proper care and attention to those affected by it in order to continue to protect the culture for everyone. Depending on certain factors, which industry you're in and how naturally diverse it may be, you might need a little extra focus on that. But in the end, overall DEI increases an environment that focuses on these principles. So a couple more things before we wrap up. How do we start tomorrow? How do we become champions for cultures within our organizations? And this process isn't going to be rocket science. It just takes some desire and a little bit of passion, and just starts with a little bit of effort. And whether you choose to start with the whole company, your team, or just yourself, you can literally start when the second you leave this room. And that is actually how you spread good culture. Remember, we're talking about behaviors. The first thing we got to do is got to assess. Hopefully we've been doing that as we've been going through today. Where are you at in one of these particular areas? And then know where you stand today and go from there. Coming from a tech world, we love iteration, crawl, walk, run. What has the most room for improvement, or what can you have the biggest impact today? And this could be just a small little step, saying hi to everyone in the morning, or pick whatever that might be, and then build from there. Quick example, I had a client I was working with. They were a fast-growing company, crazy fast-growing company, in fact, and they got railed when I walked in and started helping the organization in terms of communication. And so in talking with the CEO, right, what we just started with is, hey, just send out an email once a month and just tell people what's going on. And that email turned into a monthly meeting where he started to share some results about how the company was improving. And then that turned into a really big thing that everybody started getting excited about. Other people started getting involved and sharing information. And it was a great opportunity to come together as a team and as a company. And people really started looking forward to that event. But it just started with an email: crawl, walk, run. And then last but not least is hold the line. Just like belief was the first principle, that if you're going to make a concerted effort to implement these principles, you're going to be tested. And that's most especially when the company runs into trouble. So hold the line. It takes courage to do the right thing. And this is especially when things aren't going great, most often financially. One more bonus for you in terms of where you might find these principles useful. And this is a subject that's very near and dear to some of our hearts. But over the years, as I continued to gain experience in managing and leading others, I started to ask myself, why is the relationship between parenting and leading team members so similar? And in my net opinion, I think it's pretty darn close. And really the biggest argument you might get is that love and affection is the only main difference. But I say you can love your team and those on your team without doing all those things that are often associated with love that would be considered inappropriate in a work environment. And if you think about it, really, pretty much any scenario where one action is frowned upon in one is also frowned upon in the other. And I often think about the example of because I said so, and how many times have I said that as a parent? And I can guarantee you I would have never, ever said that to someone I worked with, no matter who they are. I would have taken time and effort to go explain it further, or if nothing else, I might have had to, real quick there. There we go. Sorry. And not that you need that graphic. But I would have tried to explain it further. I might have just said, you know what, let's just trust me on this. We'll come back and evaluate if this doesn't work. But I've never said because I've said so. And both my kids are kind of young adults now, but I only wish I'd have made this connection sooner, and that getting better in each of these principles in one arena would have made me a better in the other, specifically as a parent. I mentioned earlier, if you want to go to and check out some more resources on some people that really put together some great material, just go to performancefaction.com/8keys, and you'll find some good resources there. In addition, I put a survey in there. If you get a quick minute, I certainly love to hear your feedback. Your time is valuable to me. I'd love to know what you took away from today's presentation, or any part of the conversation you might have to add. Certainly welcome and appreciate your thoughts and feedback. So performancefaction.com/8keys. And then one more quick story before we spend a couple minutes answering questions and kind of chatting about it. But I want to talk about what I think is one of the greatest acts of leadership witnessed at one of the highest levels of leadership in the world. And this story is a testament to how powerful a seemingly small act can have in a big way on culture. Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave an informal speech over the radio to the American public just 8 days after taking office in March of 1933. That speech was seemingly insignificant in the moment, and it discussed some matters related to the banking crisis. But in the speech, FDR praised Americans for their fortitude in embracing some recent banking legislation that had been passed, including a banking holiday that was designed to stop the onslaught of withdrawals that people were making at the time, forcing a lot of banks to close their doors. And in fact, the very next day that the banks opened after this speech, the majority of those withdrawals subsided. This was a huge step in the economic recovery at the time. And over the course of his presidency, FDR would give 30 more of those speeches during his tenure as president, right up until his death in 1944. And you might well know what these have been called as the fireside chats and learned about them in elementary school or high school history class. Just simple speeches sharing information about actions the government was taking. And those speeches were instrumental in giving people a sense of purpose and hope. Right. In each one of those, he asked Americans to take some accountability in how to prove the situation and would give them various ideas to do so, but all the while demonstrating how the government was doing its part, ownership. He trained the American people on how our banking system and our economy worked, mentorship. And he talked about the results of various New Deal programs, measurement, and even told the occasional joke, fun. But prior to taking office in 1933, the U.S. had seen the worst economic depression in the history of the world beginning in 1929, what we now call the Great Depression. But every year after 1933, the U.S. GDP grew anywhere from 5 to 18% per year, with the exception of 1938, where it took a slight dip of less than 1%. And this is what you can see depicted in the green line there. And this growth occurred all the way until 1944, the year FDR died. And the next 3 to 4 years, we actually see a significant decline in GDP again until it starts to rise in the early 50s. And in fact, in the 80 years since FDR stopped giving those fireside chats, the U.S. GDP has only grown more than 5% in a single year about a dozen times, and not a single instance of more than 10%, of which it did multiple times while he was giving those fireside chats. Now, I'm not one to say all you need to do is hop on the radio to fix the American economy. And I know a lot of action occurred beyond just talking on the radio. But I have no doubt that every time FDR stepped in that front of that microphone, that he was motivated to ensure his actions matched his words and when he spoke to the American people. And the subsequent results achieved were amplified by the fireside chats. Everyone talks about building a relationship with your customer. I think you build one with your employees first. And I don't think I could have said it better myself. Awesome. Well, that's all I have for you today. Happy to take any questions, comments, or otherwise. But I sincerely appreciate your all's time today. And happy to welcome any thoughts, comments, or otherwise.
Russell, that was really great. Everyone, feel free to mute yourselves if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to drop something in the chat, feel free. I see a comment from Lisa McLeese. You take care of your staff and they will take care of you, of your paying clients. And of course, that's true.
Right on.
All right. Got some words of affirmation for you. This was awesome, interesting, and informative. I like the companies who get this win. Yeah.
That's for sure true. Yes, very much so.
Yeah, culture is very important. And how did you get into, this focus of your coaching?
So, right. One of the things that I've had to kind of, when I initially pivoted, is that culture is a hard sell at the gate, right? People at the end of the day, we want successful businesses. So this kind of has to come on the backside when maybe what's not working from the business side is really where we start to focus on culture. But we have to get there, right, as a business. So oftentimes where I work with a company, might be focusing on sales and things to alleviate some of that pressure so that they feel comfortable as we're building and growing that team that, hey, now is where culture matters most. And how do we start to focus on these principles? But it was a hard lesson learned. I will be honest and say, if you went back and probably surveyed some of the employees in my company back in the early years, they would probably say it was a horrible culture. So some of these were certainly learned by trial by fire. And I really do appreciate the personal experience of doing it incorrectly for a while, but then seeing the value of doing it good.
Yeah. And I could attest to most of this here as having, worked at multiple rungs of the ladder. I've worked for places where, you're just unheard. You keep on, hitting the ceiling. You just do your job and grunt through the day, and then actually having a good quote unquote job, that I'm currently in, as a basis of comparison. It's like, I feel for people who are out there and that are just grinding, and surviving, and they're at that lower tier of the hierarchy of needs. You know what I'm saying? Because like every day I feel myself self-actualizing, and I know that is 100% that is enabled by the culture of our organization. So it's wonderful. I got a hand up. Lisa McLeese, what you got?
So just a couple of thoughts. Gallup did a study back in, I think it was 2016, that employees who are unhappy at work are more likely to have cancer, heart disease, divorce, alcoholism, drug use. All of those things start in the work environment. So we as employers, if you think about it, we need to be good stewards of those people because it affects every other part of their life. So what you're doing is so important. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Oh yeah, great point. That'd be great content in this as well. I didn't even kind of think about the full health effects, but I'm sure that's very true. I'll have to go take a look at that.
Oh yeah. Come back home after a hard day, you're going to kick back a few.
Yeah. Well, we do spend so much time in work, so might as well make it enjoyable and fun.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Russell, in your business, what were some of the first things you started doing to improve the culture?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think it just started with little things, right? And instead of just every day come in, work, do your work, go home, come back, right? We started with some of the fun aspects, I'm sure. But then, right, when we talk about even something, how do we do mentorship? And people are busy, right? Especially in a small business environment. But if we could just come together 30 minutes a week and talk about, hey, this cool thing I found, or that tool that might help working better, right? We just start to build this culture that, hey, we don't have to just be about getting paid and making money, but that we can make this an environment where we can again get more, and then all that starts to build upon itself, right? That little thought process there again as an example ended up morphing into something we called LBU, Life Blue University, and that became a once a week thing where we brought in lunch and we would bring in outside speakers that would talk about things like, as kind of Lisa mentioned, how to so a financial advisor to talk about how to set up your wills and things to have a better financial life, a nutritionist to come in and talk about how to have better nutrition. All these things that started to talk about how do we think about our team and the total person concept. And so, yeah, everything just kind of started with a spark and grew. So I'll have to really prominently sit down and kind of think of some of the other things in that aspect, but giving budget for professional development, even thinking through our accountability systems. How, before it was just, I expected people to be accountable and do their jobs, but that's not a system. That may or may not happen. That's serendipity. So how do we ensure, build our work processes in a way they don't have to have someone being a hardcore manager thing, but that we know we're going to be held accountable to our work and all those different aspects. It just started with a little thought and built upon itself from there.
I got a question. Do you think that it's possible to kind of put too much emphasis on culture? I'm thinking of this one of my peers. She is a not physical therapist, but she's always exercising, and what she does is she goes to she works full time at this big oil company, right? And I mean, she has a permanent spot there where she helps everybody out with like nutrition plans, gets them on like little basketball teams, and they have this workout thing, they have this gym, and they have food catered and all that stuff. Do you think that you could put emphasis on culture almost to a fault, where like it's kind of taken away from your bottom line?
No, I really don't. I mean, that gets back to the definition. If you only see culture as fun and these outside things, then yes, that's where the emphasis of the business seems about producing fun versus the emphasis of the business is provide value. So I think if that is, again, going back to where I have to have all of these, that in that case, that sounds like where that could happen. And I do think it's important. And I've seen this a little bit I've seen people think they talk about culture, but only talk about it in the sense of, kind of a cursory level, or not really thinking through at these deep levels of that it is about transparency and being open and honest, that it is about building integrity, all these other things. So this is not lip service. This is things that have to be lived and breathed in their entirety throughout the business. Otherwise, you're not going to get the full benefit of it. People are going to see through it, right? If we talk about having a great culture, but we are not transparent as a company and we don't have integrity, that's all going to get kind of turned on its head a little bit, and people are just going to go back to looking out for number one. So yeah, great question there. I see another one in the chat. Does it matter if you have a long tenured staff? I mean, every that's the great thing about culture. I think it's unique to every company, every situation, based upon the natural demographics that exist there. But that's the great thing about culture, especially as business owners, is you get to create it. You get to make it what you want to be. And as long as that's all good things, positive, and in the right direction, then but I think that's why I kind of baked this whole presentation down into, you can go make any recipe you want with those 8 ingredients, but it's those kind of key ingredients that have to be in your recipe. If that makes sense.
All right, from Russel, every organization has a culture. Does the owner/leader actually know what it is? And does the culture will serve the goals of the organization? Actively identifying the desired culture and leading the organization, there is a key leadership function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That was a big mistake I think I made early on, is I put some of these goals or values on the wall, but we weren't living by them. And that was the big mistake. It's okay to have aspirational values, but I think you have to be honest and say, hey, we want to be a company that does, has integrity. This is where we're not there yet today, and this is how we're going to work towards there. But if we say we are and we're not, that's again kind of going back to what I was saying, where we're going to have some egg on our face.
Kath Nab, you got a question?
An observation. When I lived in Nebraska and was able to collaborate with people from Gallup organization a lot, I found out that there were people, they didn't have a vacation policy. You could take as much as you needed, take a sabbatical, do whatever. But there was this pressure to be happy. And so they always felt pressure to work and be happy, and be so happy that you don't take your vacation. So the culture was a strange dynamic. They felt pressed to express that they were happy all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's spooky.
It's definitely a moving target, right? And I think, like any pendulum, you can swing it too far in one direction. I think that's a really great comment. And right, it's all about finding that middle ground. And right, sometimes we have to pull back, or maybe we've gone too strong in one area and another, and that creates some unintended consequence like that. I think that's a really great point.
We got a comment from Peter. Is not a good culture living manifestation of a company's core values?
Certainly a good example. I'd say a good example of right. I think that is an important part of culture, living out those values. These are the principles to make good culture, but every company should have its own unique values and stand behind those 100%. Absolutely, for sure.
I just saw a hand pop up, but then it went away.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Well, if there is no one else, Russel, we thank you very much for this presentation. It was great, and kind of reaffirmed that I'm where I need to be. So I appreciate it. It's very nice. It was a good one.
Awesome.
And everyone, Network in Action franchisees, feel free to hang on after we end this. We're going to be doing our weekly meeting, and Scott's going to be attending. So just hold tight. And the rest of you, have a great week. And once again, Russel, thank you very much. Dan, thank you for coming through on the clutch. You're great. And we will see you next week for our sales mastery presentation.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
Russell.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you.